Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 221 of the podcast. In this episode, we have Christine Kreisher talking about 7 volunteer ideas. This is from a big webinar we did called 21 Big Ideas for Finding and Leading Volunteers. And Christine's going to talk about 7 ideas that relate to finding, leading, retaining volunteers. Her book, Stop Recruiting, Start Retaining, is just really well known among most ministry leaders. If you haven't seen that, check that out for sure. Now, before we jump in and listen to her 7 ideas, I have a question for you about volunteer recruitment and staffing and schedules and all of that. Do you wish that your volunteers served more frequently? Meaning, do you have like a schedule where volunteers serve once a month and you wish they served every other week, or they serve every other week and you wish they served once a week, every week, that presence where they're there, especially those who are leading kids or students directly? I think so. I've always wanted weekly volunteers. That's what we have in our church, but we didn't start that way. We had to get there. And one of the things that I've been wanting to create for years, I've talked to people through this, people have asked for me to create something like this, is a course called Frequency. It's going to be all about how to increase the volunteer commitment of your team, to take them from, month on, month off to every other week or weekly. But the idea being that more consistent volunteers have a greater impact in the lives of kids and students and are better for your team because you're not managing all these different schedules and who's on and who's off and who's out and all these things. And there's certainly a couple downsides to a weekly schedule, right? With on, off, or every other week or monthly, you easily have other people that can fill in if someone's out. But the same is true with weekly. You can have subs and you can have other people who step in, but then you get that presence of the weekly volunteer. So instead of needing 80 volunteers, who serve once a month, you might just need 20 and then have another 5 or 10 that are subs or in other roles or assistants or something like that. And so that course is going to launch in just 2 weeks. And I'd love to hear your feedback as I'm putting it together over the next 2 weeks. If you have questions or thoughts, just email me at nick@nickblevins.com. But that's going to launch with Ministry Boost and this round of membership that is open right now. So it opened this week. Membership will be open for 2 weeks. We only open it a few times a year. Membership includes access to all of our courses, which is over 30 right now. All of our resource bundles. I believe there are 5 of those, so like the volunteer bundle, the new family retention plan. And I was actually just updating membership the other day, and I realized there are 55 products that are part of Ministry Boost membership. And you can become a member by yourself for $27 a month, or for your entire staff or your whole church for $47 a month, less than it costs for 2 people. So go to ministryboost.org if you want to check that out. We're also going to be including the new Volunteer Boost course in there as well, which is all about recruiting and kind of an aggressive challenge to recruit volunteers in 28 days. So those are 2 newer courses that are going to be included in membership, and we come out with new bundles every quarter. For instance, the Easter bundle that we just launched is going to be a part of that. But membership is only open for 2 weeks. And if you're listening to this, it's actually less than 2 weeks, even if you listen to this the day it comes out. So don't miss that. Go to ministryboost.org. And then for today's conversation, where we're talking about 7 ideas, and Christine's going to share her ideas, you can always get the links and notes at nickblevins.com/episode 221. So let's listen to 7 ideas that Christine shared as it relates to finding and leading volunteers.
Yeah, I love this. I love being here with all of you because we're all in the same boat, right? We've had quite a challenging year. And I think we're all just trying to figure out, how do we re-engage volunteers? How do we recruit volunteers? How do we retain volunteers in this season? How do we develop leaders? And so I think the first thing is, and some of my ideas are more big picture and broader and more mindset ideas versus practical, tangible things. And this one, I just think it's so important for us to remember what excellence really is and to redefine the win, right? Redefine what success looks like in this season and to have self-compassion, right? To give ourselves a break, take a deep breath. And we do that for ourselves. We can do that better for others because the more self-compassion we have for ourselves, the more we're able to extend that to the people that we lead with and to the people that we are leading. I think sometimes we hold ourselves hostage to a standard that is unattainable and it's unfair, and it sets us up for feeling like failures. We used to do it. I'll speak for myself. I used to do it by comparing my church and my ministries to other churches, right? And it was like, oh my gosh, that's excellence, right? Like that's just so good, but that's not what I have. And so then I would just, again, feel like I'm not winning. But now I think what we do is not only are we sometimes comparing ourselves to other churches and other ministries, but we're comparing what we're doing right now with what we did a year, 2 years ago. And again, that I think that makes it really, really hard. So let's just stop for just a second, take a deep breath, and remember that excellence is doing the best we can with what we have. Right? It's not comparing it to with bells and whistles and all of these, like, no. It's just doing the best we can with what we have and with who we have, right? It's being willing to just blow it all up and say, okay, just because we used to do it this way doesn't mean that we have to do it that way now. What's the best? This is one of the most powerful questions. What's the best way? And then fill in the blank. So what's the best way for us to retain volunteers right now? What's the best way for us to create programming that will work for the number of volunteers that we have right now and with the resources that we have right now? Because some of us are also struggling with financial resources, right? Things aren't the way that they were a year and a half ago. And so I just keep talking to my team leaders and volunteers and staff, hey guys, let's just pretend we never did ministry before. Let's pretend that we never had a church before. Now, in this season, what do we need to do in order to create an excellent ministry where we are loving on our volunteers, we're appreciating our volunteers, but we're also loving on the kids or the students or the adults that we're ministering to, again, right now. And so I think sometimes it starts with asking ourselves the question, am I creating moments of excellence or mediocrity, right? Because we can very easily drift to like, that's good enough, right? But if we stick to the mindset of excellence attracts high capacity leaders too. So keep that in mind. And again, it doesn't mean bells and whistles and all the opulent. No. It just means that high capacity leaders can detect and sniff out, like if you are committed to excellence, and they will jump on board and get behind your vision and really support that vision. So tell me, guys, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's about, defining excellence. Sometimes it may be like we have to decide what we're going to stop doing, so that way we can make room for the things that are most important to be excellent as well. So I think it's really good to like, how do we assess? How do we measure what's excellent, what's not excellent? And then how do we weed out the things that, like, you know what, we would probably be excellent if we did half of what we're doing right now, or those sorts of things. So I think those are really great questions of defining what is excellent, or defining excellence for your ministry, and not play the comparison game, because everybody can do excellent in the moment. Like, I think, because we've all like had to start that like crazy 8 o'clock service or whatever, where only like 3 kids show up, and you're like, and you just don't want kids to come to it because it's not like your other ones, but it can be excellent because you can offer a relational experience there that you can't nearly as well other places. So it can still be excellent. So like defining what excellence looks like in all those different areas. I think that's a great thought, great idea.
Yeah. I think, Christina, what you said is so important, because I'm in conversations and everybody's like, well, how big's your church? And then the next phrase is, well, before COVID, right? Like, or before that. So we hear that in every phrase, of whether it's attendance or it's students, or, some of us oversee Next Gen and all that. And then, I think the other question is like, what are those things within excellence that we can define? And then what are some of those things also that are defined for us? Because I know when I talk to a lot of people, especially in children's ministry, it's like, hey, my senior pastor, or maybe my boss, or my campus pastor, or somebody else is kind of defining that for me. And that gets hard, right? So like, I think there's an aspect of, hey, like, just like Kenny said, and you had said, like, how can I be excellent in what I can control? And at the same time, kind of release some of those other things, and at other times, like, lead up to other people and say, hey, I think this can really be good at this. And I think, to me, that sounds like the difference between like management and leadership. Like, leadership sees that vision and says of what it can be or what something should be. Management is just like, hey, this is what I've got and this is all I'm going to do with it. And it might change or not. And we flux a lot in those, even from week to week, there's things that we just have to manage on that. But I think that's really good. I just, I sit there and I think, man, there's some of our kind of viewers and listeners here today that are in that place of like, man, it's hard for me to define excellence because I'm not the one who defines it, solely for my organization and my ministry. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, well, if you're not defining it, and I've been in that situation, right, where I did not have full control over those things, and I guess I still don't have full control over those things. But I think it starts with really knowing your why, right? Knowing like what you can control, controlling what you can control, and making whatever you do excellence, committing to that mindset of excellence with whatever you do, because I think what happens is that it's contagious. Right? People start to notice and then they want to be a part of it. And so, yeah, control what you can control, lead up. That's the best way to lead up, right? To do things with excellence. And then people start to take notice of those things.
That's great. That's great. Well, what you got next for us? That's one out of, you're going to share 7 big ideas with us. So excellence. 7 big ideas. What's next?
So the next one is really just research shows that there are 4 things that every volunteer needs, right? And so I think one of the challenges that as I keep looking back at those 4 things, and I'll go over them really quickly, and we talk about them in our book, but it's now how do we do those 4 things, right? So the first one is to celebrate their significance. And I think this is huge because volunteers should never feel like they're just a volunteer or just a warm body, right? Like what would we have continued in ministry if we felt that way, just a number? But we need to celebrate their significance. And when I say that, I mean celebrate the meaningful role that they play. So when we define the win and what winning looks like for our volunteers, and I think we can help allow them to speak into that. I think that's powerful. What does winning look like? Because then they own it. Then we look for those opportunities where we catch them winning, we catch them fulfilling the mission, and we celebrate that because we all know that what's celebrated gets repeated. So that's really, really important to kind of, again, ramp up that volunteer culture of retention. The next one is to provide first-class support. And this is huge. Volunteers should never feel like they don't have what they need. They don't know what to expect. We need to provide first-class support. We need to communicate early and often, and we need to talk about that. Very like constantly reminding them, showing them this is what it's going to look like. For us, we're just launching kids ministry in the next couple of weeks, the week after Easter on April 11th, be first, I should say, in-person gatherings. And so we need to be super, super clear. You cannot over communicate. I think that that's really important. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But also appreciating volunteers, that's got to be front and center, whether they're in person or maybe they're holding back and they're not a part of your in-person gatherings yet. Porch drop-offs, handwritten note cards, those Zoom calls of just like staying connected. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about those things in a bit, but I think more than ever, Kim Geddes, who is our serve director, she said this to me recently. I think more than ever, our volunteers need to hear that they're valued. We need to fuel meaningful connections. That's huge. And it's a challenge in COVID world, depending on where you live, right? We still have tons of protocol here in Pennsylvania. But volunteers should never feel like they're alone on an island. Fuel those meaningful connections, make it fun. Whatever you do, add some fun to people's lives. People are stressed out. They're depressed. They're anxious. So the more that we can do to just make people laugh and smile, I think is a huge game changer. And then empowering their passions. Right? So making sure that people know, okay, here's our policies, here's our procedures, here's the protocol, but then setting them free to do ministry in the way that God has wired them to do it is really, really powerful. And keeping in mind that volunteers, like the volunteer experience is one of the number one catalysts for spiritual growth. These are not just people that are going to like I said earlier, just a warm body, but what you're doing and what you're providing for them is an opportunity for them to grow closer to Jesus. And it should make their lives, every aspect of their lives better. Tom Schunas said once, we all need to commit to creating a volunteer culture that people would pay to be a part of. Like, oh, that's such good stuff.
Right. I think that's huge. And that's a big church idea too. I know I've worked at churches where the order of connection, there's a pathway towards connection and maturity, or how you grow at our church or whatever. And and having a vision for, like, yes, we want people to be in community. We want them to be in groups. We want them to be in intentional discipleship. But how are you positioning serving as a place where community and spiritual growth does happen? Because we do know that when people start teaching little boys and girls, and they lead a small group, they're going to have an opportunity to grow along with them as they do that. And they're going to be in tight community. And many people will choose to serve before they get into a group because it just feels maybe a little bit easier point of entry. So having a vision for serving and a church-wide vision for serving as part of the path toward assimilation, discipleship, connection. And that's huge for sure. And so, but we have to lead that way. We have to change our mindset where we're not just trying to fill holes and trying to, but it's like, no, we're trying to help people plug in to a place of community where they can use their gifts and be used by God, and find, they're a minister with a ministry, and we're helping set them up in that way.
That's right. One of the things sometimes too that we need to keep in mind is that volunteers come to us with an unwritten social contract where they expect to make friends. And so that's, I mean, not to make it more difficult, but just something to really, really think about. And how am I providing opportunities for my volunteers to connect with other volunteers and to enrich their lives in that area as well?
And I know you talked about this, you mentioned it, and I know Nick mentioned it too, but that's like really the point of the huddle, right? It's like, it's a point of where you can gather, maybe it's 8 to 10 people, or it might be, you might have a larger one. You might have 20, 25 people in there, but it's an opportunity for people to meet, to mingle, to, share a snack, pray for each other, share their lives together. And that's where like real heartwarming, like real community actually begins to happen.
So true. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about huddles. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right. Do you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to go to providing first class support first, and just talk about how communication is key. I think it's super, super important that we remember that volunteers should be communicated with. I said this earlier, often, early, right? No last minute surprises as much as possible. And there's no such thing as over communicating. I have to give Craig Rochelle credit because he came out with something right, I guess it was last May or something like that, just talking about how to lead in crisis. And one of the things that he talked about was when we communicate, be empathetic. So be empathetic, to just say to your volunteers, listen, I know that things are different. I know that things are challenging, that there's new stuff, that it's even frightening in some ways. I feel it too, but reminding them, you guys said this at the very beginning, we're all in this together, right? Leaders address the challenges and they seize the opportunities. So one of the things that we can do is acknowledge their fears and speak to those fears and help them to know and like that you do understand how they're feeling. Don't be afraid to say what people are thinking, right? Like just call it out. Like don't let it be an elephant in the room. Do everything you can to value people and help them to know that you genuinely care about them. Be confident and calm. I think this is really, really important. And there's a humility in this, right? Not confident where you're like overconfident, but just like, okay. And I think this is so key. The only thing that you can promise your volunteers in this season is that things will change and that we will flex, right? Like I'm constantly like this with my staff and volunteers team, like just open-handed. We are going to flex, guys. That's the key in this. Think long-term, but limit your plan to short-term. Have this mindset. Everything's an experiment, but nothing is forever. We're going to try this, guys. We're going to try this. Let's get together. Let's put our heads together and let's just try this, knowing that it will probably change because you're going to speak into that. You're going to be able to give feedback. And I think that's the other thing. Create a safe place for people to be able to give you honest feedback. Create that culture of open communication. Again, it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't know all the answers. I don't know what this is going to look like in 6 months, but we're going to figure it out together. Inviting people to speak into the process, listening to their feedback, thanking your volunteers for feedback, acknowledging their feedback, do something about their feedback. Even if you don't take their suggestion, help them to see that they spoke into the process of change, because again, that sends a message of value. And then the last thing I would say there is communicate hope, right? The task is to remind them. The task is too important. This is an old thing from Orange from years ago, Skipples and Loams, right? Like the task is too important to not try something new. So guys, we're going to try some new things. And innovation, our good friends always says that crisis is the birthplace of innovation, right? Ali says that to us all of the time. And I love that. And just reminding our volunteers, we're going to do this, and we're going to come up with some really cool, creative, innovative ways that if it wasn't for this crisis, we may not have otherwise come up with. And it's going to make us more effective in reaching people and helping them grow in their faith.
Yeah. So communication, that's a huge deal. I think we have to get really organized around the way we communicate. That's something over the last 4 or 5 years of, we know that like our teams, we're ready. We have our huddle notes, because some people have been asking about like, well, what do you do in your huddles? And lots of people in the chat have been answering that. But like we made a commitment on our team years ago that we have our huddle notes ready by Wednesday, and we're emailing all of our volunteers by Wednesday afternoon, everything that they need to know for the weekend. And so we created a structure, like what are we communicating? How are we communicating it? When are we communicating it? As not, and moving away from the willy-nilly, hey, do we need to email everyone this week? And
right.
creating some structure around communication. You want to add to that, Kevin?
Yeah, I was going to jump into that, because I think one of the things too is what's to kind of segue the last couple points too is communication has changed too, right? Like we've got churches and people that are listening to this that they're not together yet, or they're kind of doing stuff, or I think most places children's ministry is nowhere, maybe 40%, 50%. I haven't heard a lot over that, but the ways of communication, like how are you doing that and what are you doing? And I think one of the things that was really a really powerful idea that I got a few years ago was we had leaders coming to me before children's ministry, or even in student ministry, even more so. They were like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I know I'm just supposed to hang out and love kids. Like, well, what does that mean? Right. And so I came up with this thing on the back of their lanyard, and it just had a 3, 2, 1. And the purpose of that was, hey, I want you to introduce yourself to 3 kids or students or families you don't know, have a conversation with 2 people that you do know, and pray with somebody. And it was just this real simple, like, hey, we overuse our words sometimes, right? We just say that communication is like, hey, just go welcome families. Well, like that looks different, right? Because, where I'm at down here, like most of my friends that, my Latino friends, they're just super expressive, and they like love the hug and then there's, then I've got other friends that are real stoic and be like, oh, that's it. Like that's the extent. So how do you define that? And Christine, I was just kind of curious to you, like, what have you found, like maybe as people are rebuilding and as all this, so what are some of the best ways that you found? Of course, huddles, like, right, that's in person, but even you, Kenny or Nick, like what are some of the best ways that you found to communicate with volunteers, not only, like you said, communicate value, right, but communicate expectations. You said that too, communicate feedback in that, because some of these are infrastructure systems things and they sound like great ideas, but I'd love like maybe 1 or 2, like, like that thing of, hey, what do I need to do? It's 3 conversations, all those kind of things become really, really easy when you have those kind of directions. So what do you found? What are some real like bare bones ways of communicating during the season?
I love that you talked about just being super specific, right? Because that's sometimes I make the assumption that when I say, like you just said, go welcome people, that everybody's going to welcome
100%.
people today. So the more detailed we can be, the better. I think the other way to do that is to, like I said earlier, catch people doing those things really well, celebrating that in the huddle, for example. Like, hey, last week I saw Kevin do this when he spoke. Like, be so specific in your praise, because then people go, oh, that's a value. There's a specific way I can do this.
Right.
I can do that too. So it's vision and, that significant piece that I think really makes it go. It's not just instruction now. There's heart behind it.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, like, a funny kind of thing too is I remember we used to tell like small group leaders to go introduce themselves to their kids. And I remember when I was in Georgia, I had a guy who literally drove to this person's house. Well, you show up unannounced to somebody just at someone's house, I can get you shot in the South, So like, you got to be a little in templates. And I think my goal, even as executive pastor now, is trying to figure out ways of how do I make kind of those aligned templates that make it seem sincere, but like kind of, hey, here's 3 or 4 different emails to like introduce yourself. And this is what you should have in that email, right? Because people get, my wife would write a full page thing. I may text, hey, how's it going? You know what I'm saying? Like, and send a meme.
Sometimes even write a script, right? Like, so we tell our coaches, like we have coach level leaders, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we have coach level leaders and we say, care for your volunteers, right?
Yeah. Well, so what does that mean?
What does that look like? Right. We've written scripts for like, what does a phone call sound like for just checking in? What does a leadership development coffee sound like? Like, what are you actually saying in that? And I just assumed, again, like, well, everybody does it like this, but that's not the case. Same with huddles. And we'll talk about that in a second.
Scripting.
Talk about that.
Scripting is powerful. If you want somebody to do something, just give them the words and let them just change their names. And it's really cool. Like when you move to where like, yes, okay, maybe you're the youth pastor or you're the children's pastor, but you don't need to be the primary communicator to every single volunteer. Right. You can create a script that you send out to your coaches that they edit and they communicate to their volunteers. And it changes the way you communicate. It changes it. You're building a ministry where you're elevating your leaders, and it's not all about you.
And even better, Christine, steal it from somebody else. Take it like,
that's right.
Hey, get Christine's, Google somebody else. Don't even like for somebody else. All right, go ahead, Christine. We can talk.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's called empowerment, right? Okay. So make it fun. This is the whole connection thing. This is how, like you said earlier, like we help people make friends with other people and connect volunteers, especially new volunteers. Our volunteers say that the huddle is the most important part and the best part of their week. So that's pretty incredible, right? Well, what I found was that when I say huddles, again, you may be picturing something different, right? When I say huddles, I think fun. When I have gone and participated in some huddles and experienced different huddles, I've felt like more like a funeral versus fun. And so I realized that there are different definitions and different styles of huddles. I will tell you the one that I feel like has worked best for us over many, many years. I've been in ministry for 20 years and been doing huddles for probably 13, learned that from Sue Miller a long time ago. If you go to my website, ChristineKreisher.com, you will actually, there's a PDF called Nuts and Bolts of a Volunteer Huddle that kind of walks through some of these things, but I'll just cover some of them now. First of all, I think it's super important to if you want to create an irresistible volunteer culture where volunteers do the recruiting for you, and if you want to raise your volunteer retention and engagement rate, the lowest hanging fruit is providing better connections amongst your volunteers, and huddles are the best way to do that. But again, I wrote a win statement for our volunteer huddles because I think that just helps to really gauge where you're at with things. And again, this is just my suggestion and the way that we do it and have found it to be effective. Over 90% of all of our volunteers church-wide show up for huddles because they kind of have this framework. So a huddle is a 7 to 10 minute focused, high energy mini rally to cast vision, build team morale, communicate important details, last minute changes, which there should be very few of those, and to pray for the day. Boom, 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 right? Not be spiritual and I'm going to sound like a terrible pastor, but like, it's not a time to take prayer requests, right? And now if there's someone on your team that has told you about a prayer request, you can say, and today we're going to pray for, but you've got to lead that. You've got to be able to rein that in because again, it's meant to be high energy and focus. It's meant to like, all right, everybody, like hands in, let's go. Let's get out of here and go do some incredible ministry. So here's some questions to ask to determine if your huddle is a win. Was it fun? Did people laugh? Was it no more than 10 minutes? Was it inspiring? Did we share an inspiring story of life change, or do we celebrate one of our volunteers that we caught them winning and fulfilling and living out our values? Was it informative, right? Do people have what they need? Do our volunteers have what they need? Do people feel more connected as a result? And did we pray for the day, right? Like, so those are just some ways to just say, okay, am I winning with huddles? Again, that's just my way. It doesn't have to be your way, but you can kind of customize that. Choose a huddle leader who's energetic and fun. If that's not you, don't worry about it. that's an opportunity to develop a leader, right? We very rarely does our staff lead huddles. We empower other people, coach level leaders, or just someone else on the team who really loves people and is highly relational. And I think that it's also ideal to keep that huddle size to like 10 or 12 volunteers, right? So you can figure out how to do that, whether that's department wide or any of those. I know, Kenny, you said like prior to COVID, providing coffee and food, like great opportunity. Now we're not able to do that quite that way, but there's still opportunities to do that. Again, that nuts and bolts of a volunteer huddle PDF is super helpful because it breaks down all of these things. But I just think that whether you're doing it on Zoom or whether you're doing them in person, that's just a great framework. And I would say throughout COVID, we have continued to meet with our volunteers through Zoom to huddle up, right? To just check in with one another and to do those little fun icebreaker, team building activity. And we just laugh together, we pray together, and it's just, again, sends that message of we value you. It's not just the role that you play, but it's who you are, that we're connected to one another and we're in this together. I think those are powerful things.
Yeah, I want to jump in. I'll tell you, huddles are awesome. I would add one more question. Was it planned? Like, you don't know how many huddles I've been to where people don't plan it. They just think, I'm going to tell an inspiring story, or I'm going to tell a joke, or I'm going to go to that. But like, the intentional of like those things that you said, inspiration, and even if I'm not talking about a planning center thing for it, but is having some details and saying, hey, I want to be super effective and move to that. So, okay. So I want to keep you because we've got one or two more, and then we've got Big Jim coming up. So
yes.
I'll add one more sub idea. Which is really fun. Sometimes invite a parent to lead the huddle. Let them tell the story of how their child has been impacted or whatever. Man, that pumps people up in a big way. So plan guests, have guests. Sometimes when my lead pastor's not teaching, I'll bring him around and let him just like drop in on huddles.
Oh, that's great.
Fires them up.
Yeah.
That's great, man. No minds. Okay.
And work with whoever's leading huddle, like you just said, Kevin, plan, right? Like help them, give them the framework, walk them through, help them pick the icebreaker or the thing, you know what I mean? Like give them the guide so that they feel equipped and they don't feel stupid. When people are confused, they say no. So help make it super clear. Okay. This next one, I'll just go really quick. Commit to a mindset shift when it comes to recruiting. Recruiting is not a 4-letter word. I love recruiting volunteers because my mindset is I'm giving you the gift that somebody gave to me that transformed my entire life. It is an incredible, is your mindset that you're giving them a gift or are you giving them a burden? And I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make is we make assumptions of people who are not volunteering. We assume they don't care, or we assume they're too busy, or we assume whatever, right? But here's the thing that we need to do. We need to just ask. We have a responsibility to help people, to invite people into this incredible adventure called ministry, right? Of impacting lives, being a difference maker. And so I think sometimes what we do is depending on your background, like you can be fearful because it feels like rejection if somebody says no, right? Like they're saying no to you. They're not saying no to you. They're saying no to the opportunity. I always use this analogy because I think it's powerful. When you go to a restaurant and you order a cheeseburger and fries, the server comes up to your table and says, would you like ketchup to make your burger and fries better? Because the server thinks that ketchup makes burgers and fries better. And you say no to the ketchup. I don't know, maybe you're different, but have you ever seen a server fall on the floor in a fetal position and cry because you said no to ketchup? No. Same with when we are inviting volunteers or potential volunteers, recruiting people. If they say no, they're not saying no to you. And I always say this, they're saying no to God, and that's on them, right? But really, I mean, for some people, it's not a good time, right? For some people, it's just like, there's so many different factors. But when you are very specific in your invite and you say to them, hey, I see this in you. You would be incredible at this, and we could do this together. And if they still, like you do that really well, and they still say no, it's okay. Next, I think you guys say that you have to ask, is it 10 people to get to one? Is that kind of the The number that you guys have been talking about in Ministry Boost? Yeah. So it really is, I want to say it's a numbers game, but it's a numbers game, right? And it's okay. So when you realize that not everybody is going to say yes, and not everybody should. So it's okay. And God's going to provide when we are faithful with that. So gift or burden, remember the catch up.
I love it. You know what? Probably every single person on this call, a couple hundred people, they all at some point said yes to a volunteer opportunity. So the life-changing impact that can happen by saying yes, and who wouldn't want to share that with someone else? So it is, I'm a 7. I'm an Enneagram 7.
Me too.
And so these conversations are hard. Yeah, me and Christine are just having a party over here. But it's hard. Like I'm afraid. There's been many times where I've seen somebody, I was like, oh, they'd be good. But like they're CEO of a company, there's no way. And then like a year later, I'd see them serving somewhere else and said, I should have asked them.
Yep.
I should have asked them.
Yep.
And
I had three businesses when somebody recruited me. I had 3 businesses going. I had 3 kids at home, two in diapers. And thank God Carolyn did not rob me of the opportunity. She just tapped me on the shoulder, said, hey, you'd be great at this. How about you join me? And I was like, oh, I have all of these things going on in my life, but I can be a part of impacting the kingdom of God. What? Yes. I was scared. I was apprehensive. I knew I didn't have what it takes. But it grew my faith. It changed my life. And so please don't rob people. Don't rob them.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing too, Christine, on that is some people like ask once and then they're done. They're like, hey, do you want to serve? And maybe that isn't a good time, but then they say, oh, they write that person off. And it's like, man, anybody who's been in sales or in the marketplace knows that there's maybe a season where that person can't, but let me wait 60 days and call back and, hey, how are you doing? I'd love to get you involved again. Or how was that going? Or something so no now doesn't mean no ever. It just means for that. And I love what you're saying, because too many people, they say no for people before they've even asked them and stuff. But I will say, on the other hand, some people say no because there isn't a kind of quality, they're not aware of like quality level jobs too. You've got some people that, hey, if you just say I want to work in kids, they're like, oh, you want me to change diapers? Like, no, I need you to oversee 7, eventually oversee 7 volunteers. Like there's some really high level people that if we are a little bit more transparent about some of the higher level jobs that we have or opportunities, volunteers, that they'll jump into that. And so they may be saying no to that, to that one thing. But I think, I always try to go through our list and like, man, 3 or 4 times a year, every person in this church should have a conversation about somebody serving with them. Mm-hmm. And it can be done different. And of course there's a few people that are blacklist if you call me one more time, but they're still here. And I still, I think all of that stuff, I'd rather be annoying and empowering, and because I think that's being a good steward of what God's called me to do. So yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, I'm going to say one more thing to that, because when you think about high capacity leaders, or you identify people in your church that already have a following, right? Whether that be that they're a business leader or whatever, corporate executive, or they have a following. It's so important, I think, even if you don't have a high level position for them already, if you invite them to come and observe a program or come and observe a ministry or sit in one of your leadership meetings or something like that, to just like, hey, I value you and your perspective and your experience. Come and speak into this. So many times you will then, through those conversations, identify a role that never even existed, and you craft it for that person. And then they end up making things so much better and speaking into, I could go on about that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So next one is make it personal. The longer you're in ministry, you will drift to make it better instead of making it personal. I think we've all said that, right? And we all acknowledge that. Remember that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. We tell small group leaders, we've been telling small group leaders this in family ministry for years, right? Like your kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. But sometimes we forget that about our volunteers. We need to remember that they are a person. They are a mom or a dad or a business leader or a brother or a sister, whatever, a follower of Jesus, and that we care about them holistically, and not just the role that they're playing. And remember, you guys talked about this, one of the game changers for all of you, I think you said it, and for myself as well, is this coach level leader, right? We have to remember that we're not Superman. We only have the capacity to care for a certain number of people. And that number is probably around 5, no more than 10 volunteers. And after that, You need to be identifying coach level leaders who will care for, they'll recruit, they'll train, they'll love on and support and appreciate the volunteers in their span of care. If it was good for Moses, right? Jethro went to Moses in Exodus and said, dude, what are you doing? You're going to burn out. You can't possibly care for all of these people. So let's keep that in mind. If we want to care for our volunteers well, we need to really develop that coach level leader to be able to do that. And people that are committed to finding a volunteer's fit, to be open-handed, to say, okay, maybe this role isn't the best role for you, but maybe it's over here, and being open-handed in that versus, and even if it's sometimes, okay, they're not great for kids ministry, but they'd be great in student ministry, or they're not great here, but they would be great on our guest services team, whatever. But just loving people well, stewarding the gifts that are inside of them, that requires getting to know people, taking people out for coffee and saying, tell me about you. Tell me your story. What makes you tick? What are your passions? What makes you come alive? And then making sure that we are helping them connect to opportunities that they'll thrive in, rather than just survive in. That's really, really important. Anything to say on that before I move on to this last idea, number 7?
No, that sounds
keep
good.
going.
Let's crush it.
So this is the one I'm most passionate right now, because I'm just talking to so many ministry leaders all over the country, and just that they are tired. They're tired that this past year has kicked their butts. I'm one of those people. I think we would all acknowledge, we are all kind of just crisis after crisis after crisis. And so one of my favorite verses in the Bible is our Matthew 11:28-30. And I want to read that to you guys right now. This is from the Message version. Jesus said, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me and watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace." And then Jesus says, "I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." In this season, I talked about this, the very first idea was self-compassion. In this season, please be a good friend to yourself. And more than that, please take the time to care for your soul. Stay connected to the vine, right? Allow Jesus to be the one who is your rock and your strength. You are not the rock. Please remember that. You're going to mess up. You're going to try some things. You're going to get some things wrong. But you know what? As long as your eyes are on the prize and you are committed to excellence, doing the best you can with what you have and with the volunteers that you have, God will honor that. He is faithful. When we spend time, when we create rhythms in our lives. I'm reading a book again right now called Replenish by Lance Witt. I'm also reading a book called The Sacred Slow. John Mark Homer has an incredible website. He has a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, How to Stay Emotionally Healthy and Spiritually Alive in the Chaos of the Modern World. Listen, we can very often, very, very often sacrifice our souls on the altar of ministry. And where's the Jesus in that? That's not what we're called to do, right? But here's the challenge. We get the attaboys and the pats on the back for being high capacity leaders. When is the last time you were praised for just being? We get praised for doing. But Jesus wants us to be with him. He wants everything that we do to be an overflow of our being. Everything we do should come from and be an overflow from the time that we spend with Jesus. And I think that it's so, so important that we pay attention. It's in this book, Lance Witt says, paying attention to your outer life and not paying attention to your inner life is like getting a facelift when you have a malignant tumor. Man, if we are leaders and we are followers of Jesus, we're not making widgets, right? It's about people. It's about reaching people and helping people grow in their faith in Jesus. We cannot give people what we don't have. We can't take people to places that we've not been ourselves or we've not been in a long time. And so I just encourage you to create those rhythms, to take care of your soul, be a good friend to yourself, because that then will overflow into everything that you do.
Christine is one of the best when it comes to leading volunteers, encouraging them, challenging them, recruiting, retaining, as she literally wrote the book on retaining volunteers. Again, check out Stop Recruiting, Start Retaining. You can get all the links and notes at nickblevins.com/episode 221. Here are a few of the action steps I thought of coming out of her ideas there. One is to redefine the wins for your ministry, like she talked about. I felt like that is especially true now, right? With where we are, and your church is meeting maybe in person, but if you are, I bet you most people aren't coming in person, so you still have online. And so what does a win look like? I was talking to a leader the other day where she was trying to figure out goals to talk to her boss about, but then do you base them on last year? Last year, obviously, a lot of it was mostly online. Do you base it on 2 years ago? Well, that's weird because nobody's that I know of is anywhere near the pre-COVID attendance that they had. And so she's just trying to figure that out. And I think, to me, what I said to her, which I would say to you, is, set them for right now. Like, what are you experiencing now? And then what kind of goals can you set to grow from here? So redefine the wins for your ministry. Action step 2, get a huddle going somehow, volunteer huddle. Maybe you already do those, so you're good to go there. Maybe you did, but then pandemic they went by the wayside. Bring those back in person. Maybe you'll use the Marco Polo app or something like that, where you can video message volunteers and you can kind of huddle that way. Find some way to get huddles going with your volunteers. And then last, check out the Replenish book. What she talked about there was just powerful. And when we had this webinar live, people were commenting other things, other resources in the chat. She shared a couple other ones as well, like the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And I encourage you to check out that Replenish book because I think that'd be really, really helpful for all of us. And as I said in the beginning, Ministry Boost membership is open just for 2 weeks, actually less than 2 weeks by the time you're listening to this. The new Volunteer Boost Challenge is available as part of membership, and the brand new, not yet finished, frequency course will be out as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on that as I'm building it and filming it. The idea is to help you, move volunteers from a lower commitment, once a month, once every other week, to a bigger commitment, every other week, weekly, whatever that looks like. And so it'll be a whole plan and strategy for that, scripts, everything you need to do that in your ministry. But you got to sign up for Ministry Boost membership to get access to it early, and you can check that out at ministryboost.org. That's it for this episode. Check back next week to hear 7 ideas from Jim Weidman, the GOAT, greatest of all time children's pastor, the patriarch of children's ministry, as I like to say. And he's going to share 7 ideas mostly about recruiting. So you don't want to miss that. Make sure you subscribe so you don't ever miss one of these episodes. And I'll catch you next week on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.